Hello, my dear learner. I once again take this opportunity to welcome you to another lesson. In our today's lesson, we'll continue with our discussion on the topic development of management thought, or the evolution of management. Just to have a recap of what we have discussed about this topic so far, we did introduce the main phases that the practice of management has gone through, where we had the pre-classical era, the classical era, the neoclassical era, and the modern era. We said that the pre-classical era is the period or is the earliest practice of management. And this was before the Industrial Revolution. The main feature of this school of thought or this era is that during this time there existed no written or documented principles of management to guide managers in what they did. As a result, the process was haphazard, ad hoc, and not standardized at all, and managers relied on their personal judgment and intuition to make managerial decisions. The next era was the classical era, and this era emerged at the start of the Industrial Revolution period, mid-18th century. And the era is also referred to as the structural perspective, for the reason being that the main focus of this era was on structure, organizational structure in terms of job, in terms of hierarchy of authority, in terms of coordination and communication processes, as well as financial incentives or rewards. The third era is the neo-classical era. This era took place from the 1920s, thereabouts, all the way to 1950s. And two perspectives were developed around this time, so that the neoclassical era comprises of two perspectives. One perspective is the human relation perspective, or the behavioral perspective, and the other perspective was the quantitative perspective. These are two very different schools of thought, but they were developed around the same time. So we're identifying two perspectives of the neoclassical era, so that the neoclassical era comprises of two perspectives, which we are identifying as the human relations perspective, and the other perspective is the quantitative perspective. Quantitative perspective. We are saying both are different perspectives developed at around the same time. Developed at around the same time. And this period is 1920s to 1950s. So we will proceed to discuss both perspectives separately, and we will start with the human relations movement. So perspective number one is the human perspective. Human perspective. The human perspective emerged owing to the criticisms that were leveled at the earlier era, which was the classical era. The classical era emphasized on structure and performance of tasks. But according to the human relation theorists, that disregarded the worker, the human elements at the workplace. And they were of the view that structure of work, structure of tasks, and structure of power and authority were not the only important considerations in achieving organizational performance. If anything, as far as they were concerned, the employee, the human aspect at work might be more important when it comes to increasing or improving organizational productivity. And most of these theorists were psychologists and sociologists by profession, as opposed to the classical theorists who are mostly engineers. There are many theories or proponents of the human perspective, but then the main proponent and pioneer of the human relation movement is Professor Elton Mayo, whose work is contained in the Hawthorne studies. So the human perspective, we will consider the work of Elton Mayo, and his work was in the Hawthorne studies or experiments. Elton Mayo, the personality, the main personality behind these experiments. Coming first as a human relation theory was the work of Elton Mayo and fellow associates from the Harvard University. These guys conducted a set of experiments in a company based in the USA, Chicago to be particular, in a firm or in a company known as the Hawthorne Electrical Plants. And these experiments were not initiated by Elton Mayo himself, but they were rather initiated by the company itself. The set of experiments ran for a considerable period of time, from 1923 to 1932. And they were conducted in different sets of experiments. So the company initiated, in conjunction with a government research body, the experiments. And the main aim of these experiments was to study the place or the effect of human factor at the workplace. However, when the company initiated these experiments, they were getting puzzling results. They were making puzzling observations. And it reached a point where they had to call in experts to take over the experiments. And this is when they called in Elton Mayo, who was then a professor at the Harvard Business School. And together with his associates of the university, they came to continue with the experiments. Essentially, the experiments, as I said, were primarily concerned with studying people, especially in terms of social relationships at the workplace. And the experiments were four, but generally the main ones were three, which are the ones that we normally talk about. So we're saying these experiments, the experiments were conducted at the Western Electric Company, Hawthorne plant. In the USA. And the period is from 1923 to 1932 thereabouts. And they were aimed, the aim of the experiments was to study the effects of social relationships at the workplace. There are three sets of experiments. The experiments. One, lighting experiments. The second one was relay assembly room. Experiments. And the third one was the bank wiring observation room. Experiments. Lighting experiments. Now, the lighting experiment was conducted to test or study the effect of illumination or lighting on workers' productivity. And it was conducted on a group of 6 women who were picked and were informed that they were a special group of observation or study. And during this time, the researchers were with the women. And they continued, or the researchers continued to guide and inform the group whatever was happening or whatever it is that they were doing. Basically, it involved changing the quality of lighting for the experimental group. And from the study, the researchers observed that regardless the quality of lighting or lights, the productivity of this group of women kept on improving regardless of how the state of light was. They only stopped working when it was too dark to see.
Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to get yourself a copy of our professionally prepared study text and revision partners. Visit our shop along Tom Boyer Street, Pioneer House, 3rd floor, opposite Fire Station.